Larry Benjamin, and we're gonna do my very first Outside the Margins for Prison Book Alliance, and it is going to just be whatever I can come get out of Larry today. And I've already told him that if he asks too many pointed questions, I'm going to take the fifth. So with that, welcome, Larry.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yes, it will be. Well, let me just start with, for anybody who hasn't read a Larry Benjamin book, you really should. You have how many books out? Like four?
Three.
Three. And you have like, what, 17 awards for those three books?
I wish. It's actually, I think we're at four.
Right. So you have more awards than you do books, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Thanks. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Well, I started with what I read the first book, What Binds Me. And I think you were a runner-up, second place, I think, for a Rainbow Award last year.
Yeah, that was for the short stories, Damaged Angels.
And then this year you came out with Unbroken.
Right.
And that one won, or actually came in second, or was the second, was one of the finalists for the Lambda Literary Awards, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that was that one I hadn't actually seen coming. We thought, well, we'll enter it and see what happens, and when it made finals, I was thrilled.
So let's talk about that for a second, because honestly, when I saw that, I was like, wow. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I liked it. I love the book, but it's amazing, like when something you really like makes it, and because you so often it's like there's so many out there. Just being one of what's the last five?
I think in the romance category it was 10 maybe.
Okay. And I know you were there. I know T.J. Klune actually won.
Yes.
And I think Edmund Manning was there.
Yes.
There
were so many amazing writers who were there that night. It was incredible.
Did you get to talk to Edmund?
No.
Oh my God.
There was such a crush of people that it was hard to kind of get to the people. But yeah.
Edmund, I'm going to shout out because I met Edmund at GRL this year. Edmund is an amazingly funny guy. And so, and he's a great writer too. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say he's funny but stinks. No, he's really a great writer too. But he's just an amazingly funny guy, and he's such a great guy to talk to. So, if you get a chance, do that. But let's cycle back to Larry. I'm sure Edmund enjoys the shout out. But let's cycle back to you. What was it like? Talk about that.
Going to Lambda or being nominated?
Well, start with being nominated.
So I knew the book. We had entered the book, right? That much I knew, and I knew when they were going to announce it, and I had gotten up that morning. Like I couldn't sleep the night before, and I got up and I went to check it, and they hadn't posted yet. So I was like, oh well. I just went on with my day, and I was at work, and my phone went off, and there was I think it was on Twitter. Somebody posted on Twitter, "Hey, do you know that congratulations on being a finalist?" And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? So I wrote them back in there. I forget who it was. It was another writer. I can't remember who it was. And Kathy Pagao, maybe? I forget. So I go out there, and there it is on the list. So right away, of course, I'm like emailing my publisher who's in the UK, and I go, hey, we made it! So that was actually kind of fun. I think the biggest thing for me was when you kind of read through the list, and there were so many incredible writers, and you had all of these writers who had gone through, they had master's degrees in fine arts and writing, and they had gone through the prestigious writing programs and all of that stuff, right? And there was all of these people, and then suddenly there was me. And it was kind of interesting because, nobody actually knew who I was. Nobody really knew who my publisher was. I mean, Beaten Track is pretty small. They produce some really good books, but they're relatively small and kind of off the radar. So I thought it was incredible that the book that from a writer nobody ever heard of, from a really small publisher that nobody really knew, actually made the cut. I was happy with that.
I mean, Unbroken was actually a really good. You write in a certain style, at least you have with What Binds Me and Unbroken, which is really kind of, I want to say it's kind of unique. You take different, I don't know if it's years or months or just blocks of time, and then you always kind of start with what's going on at the time, almost like one of those when you get your birthday calendars, what was happening on this day in whenever when you were born. And so it kind of has those little snippets of what's going on right at the time where you're writing about. And what made you start like that? Because I know What Binds Me has that, and then What binds us, not what binds me. What binds us.
Binds
And
us. So that was actually interesting because the stories tend to start or take place in the 70s and 80s, right? Which is kind of when we grew up. And with What Binds Us, it was very deliberately set in the 70s through the mid 80s, I think it ran. It was a 10-year period. And that was because a lot of the story was around the backdrop of the onset of the AIDS crisis. So it had to be kind of set because that was kind of an innocent time and everything changed in a year or two because of the whole AIDS crisis. So it was very much set in that time. And when I was working with my editor, Rhonda Helms at Carina Press, as we're going through the book, one of the things she says was, you're very rooted in certain times. Let's look at ways how we can kind of underscore what the time was. So we looked at things like, if you think about What Binds Us, there was a lot of references to the popular music of the day. There was some talk around what clothes they were wearing, kind of what cars they drove, and that was our way in that book of grounding it in that time period, so you always knew exactly when you were because we kind of skipped years and moved around. And I took that a step further with Unbroken, because Unbroken spans 40 years, which is a huge amount of time. You take this kid from the age of 6 to about the age of 47, I think. So what I did, because, as you know, I kind of work back and forth in time, and then I skipped chunks of years, so I always wanted to make sure you knew what the year was. So I started thinking about because I lived through that period, right? I was thinking about what was going on at those times, what was kind of happening in the larger world. And then I decided that for people who didn't necessarily grow up in then, I really wanted to hit those highlights of what was going on. And so I started doing research. So I started out with things like the price of bread and gasoline in that year. Some of the things were kind of funny. Like I think in one year, I forget which year it was the year that Coke released that campaign, I want to buy the world a Coke and teach it harmony. And that's one of the things that's mentioned in that little tidbit about the time frame.
I thought you were going to say something about like the new Coke Zero, new Coke formula or something that everybody was like, ah.
That might have been in there later on when they brought out new Coke and it lasted 6 months and then they went back to old Coke, yeah.
Or was it Crystal Pepsi? Wasn't that the other one? It was really disgusting.
I forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah. So it just kind of becomes a device to help you understand what was happening at that time.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I think that runs through your books, at least with those two novels, was your characters. The characters, like, are, for lack of a better term, like sort of like, I mean, in What Binds Us, they get married in like the 80s or something, which is unheard of. But it was sort of like was that sort of something that you thought about at the time, or is it just something that you wanted to like just show?
So I think What Binds Us was more than anything was a modern day fairy tale, right? There was this incredible love story, and there was all of this stuff going on. There was all of the great wealth, and they were almost like modern day princes, if you think about it, right? And so I wanted it to be this kind of romantic thing where they existed in this kind of dream world, right? And then they come and get up against the AIDS crisis. But the wedding thing came out of the fact that was always kind of my dream as a kid. And it shows up in Unbroken when Lincoln talks about age 6, he's going to marry his best friend Orlando. That was very much me. I always grew up thinking that I'm going to find my dream prince and marry him. Whether or not that could actually happen never occurred to me. It was what I wanted to do, and I thought I would just do it. So when I was writing What Binds Us, I thought, hey, there's these two guys who are in love, and they think that they have a right to their love and to be together, so they're going to get married. And that's kind of what that was, because that was always my dream. So this was kind of my fantasy fairy tale, right? So they have this wonderful wedding with these really great vows and all of that stuff. And that's kind of how it came about. I think it's interesting because we actually did a commitment ceremony, I don't know, probably 10 years after I wrote that book, and I ended up just pulling my vows right from What Binds Us.
Yes, that's another thing I was going to say. I've noticed that in your books that I don't know you that well, but they do sort of tend to be autobiographical, at least a little, I think.
Absolutely. I've always had difficulty separating reality from fiction. So I think in my books they tend to blend. I think that's probably more true in Unbroken than anywhere else. But even in What Binds Us, I think there's an opening scene where Thomas Edward, his parents take him to church, and he takes his bow tie and throws it away, and they can't find it, and they're late for church. That was actually a true story. I did that when I was probably 3 or 4 because I didn't want this bow tie. My parents insisted I wear it, so I threw it down the stairs or something. They couldn't find it for months.
Yeah, I never had that problem. We were not really the get super dressed up for church. You had to get dressed up and not shirt and tie.
Oh, please. We went to public school and we wore a shirt and tie and carried briefcases every day for 12 years. So you can imagine what hell my childhood was.
I don't think it seems like it turned out okay. But let's go back a little bit if you don't mind. So you actually got married this year, right?
We did, June 28th. It was actually our 17th anniversary and the 45th anniversary of Stonewall.
So you were finally, you don't have to write about it in a book. You could actually write about it for real, huh?
Yes.
How was that?
It was unreal, right? Because you think about the fact of how much has changed from the time I was 6 years old and decided that one day I was going to marry my best friend, right? And to growing through a world where, yeah, that's not really possible. And then 17 years ago, almost 18 years ago, we kind of did the commitment ceremony, right? Because back then, you couldn't do more than that, and that's kind of what we thought, this is it, right? It's never going to be more than that. And then 2004 came, and gay marriage came in Massachusetts. And then nothing happens for, I don't know, what, 8, 9, 10 years, and then all of a sudden, in a year, like 32 states in the District of Columbia have gay marriage.
So, it's interesting because, you know, my day job, I work in the courthouse. I do certain, and DC had, they had, City Council passed the Marriage Act, and some people wanted to put it on the ballot, and they refused. And basically what they said was in DC, you were not allowed to put people's rights up for a vote. They didn't allow it. And the Judge Macaluso, was somebody I had known, and she was just like very clear, and she wrote this very good opinion on it. And I ran into her in the courthouse, and I told her thank you, and she was like, "What?" I was like, "She had like no idea." And I was like, I guess it kind of shocked her that I was like outing myself. It was like everybody in my office knew, so who cared, right? But it was just an amazing difference though in Maryland, where they actually put it up for a vote, and we won by like, what, 12 percentage points? It wasn't even close. And so it's just a really, because I think in DC they were really concerned that it might not pass if you put it up for a vote. So it's like, yeah, it's just an amazing time.
It's amazing, but I think it's crazy when you think about the fact that somebody thinks that they actually have the right to vote on somebody else's rights. I mean, that's just insane. And I don't understand why people think that, no, this is okay, I can do that. I don't get to vote on your rights. So it's just a weird thing. So I'm glad that that's kind of changing.
I agree with you on that, because that was, like I said, that was the whole thing with DC. They said, look, you cannot put the rights of a minority up for vote. There's some statute, or there's some part of the home rule, there's something that says you can't do it. But they did it in Maryland, and it passed. You know what an amazing feeling it is that when people, because like 56% of the population is not gay. 56% of the population doesn't have gay family members or friends like that. It's the people that voted for it. It was just when you see that, it was just like an amazing feeling. It's just beyond like just the legislator doing it. Yeah,
and I think people have really stepped up. I mean, I didn't think it was fair, but it was really wonderful to see that people said, hey, you know what, this is the right thing to do. If you're going to ask me to vote, then I'm going to say, yeah, you should do this.
Yeah, and it was, like I said, it was a pretty amazing, the whole journey was kind of amazing, because our state delegate lives like 4 blocks away. He was one of the co-sponsors of it, and they had a rally or a meeting. My daughter was like 4 months old at the time we went, and he was kind of funny. He's like, "Yeah, I'm a politician. Just the baby." And he was one of these people that did it because his best friend in the state legislature was a lesbian, and he was pushing for it. And so we started with that, and then we were going to go down to Lobby Day, which was with Isabel, my daughter, and we were going to go down there, and he says, no, don't worry about it, we got the votes. And so okay, so we moved past that, and then we went to like the whole, it passed the legislature, and then they had the Proposition 6, so we had to go for that. We had all the signs up and stuff, and we went to the meeting, and the governor was there and stuff. It was just like an amazing journey, because like all these politicians took our picture, because we were like the only 2 guys with like an infant. So it was just kind of like I said, it was an amazing kind of journey until then. Then when the vote passed, it was like, wow, 56%. Yeah. Okay, take that.
Oh, it's been incredible.
And I know you. Okay, I know a little bit of the history of What Binds Us, and you wrote that what you started that like 17 years ago or 10, 15 years ago.
It sat in the drawer for 17 years.
Okay, so when you started writing that, I mean, when you read it now, or when you read it even when it came out, gay marriage was something that was happening. I mean, there were maybe only like 4 or 5 states at the time when it came out, or maybe six, whatever. Um, but when you wrote that, it's like I remember saying, like, when I met Mike, I was like, I'm not going to get married. I mean, my parents won't come, and your parents won't know. It's like, and we got married. Everybody showed up, and the entire family showed up. I mean, but you know, 19 years ago when we met, or 20 years ago, I was like, I used to say, your parents won't know, and my parents won't come. And now it's like, but when you wrote that, you know, gay marriage, were you kidding me?
Um, no, I think I have always been really determined. And at 6, right, when I went to my best friend, at 12 when I met Jose, and I knew that this is it, I'm going to marry him when I grow up, we're going to adopt some kids, we're going to buy a house. I never let go of that, and it never, ever occurred to me that anything was going to keep me from doing that. It's like I was just focused. And Stanley, my husband, actually, calls it lock and load, where I get an idea in my head or I focus on a goal and I just keep going for it. And I think that's what changes the world. I was never going to stop until I got married because I had the right. It's what I wanted to do.
So you're one of those people that when you get an idea in your head, you basically need a 2x4 to the back of the head to get it out?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of that's what allowed me to survive, right? All of the teasing aside and all of the other kind of crap that you go through growing up, it was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to go do this. And I'm just going to keep going.
Okay, so let's shift a little bit because something I want to talk to you about. I know in your books there is a very strong, gay fiction is pretty much a minority genre, but you have like you most of your characters, main characters at least, are minorities, correct?
Correct.
And I'm gonna guess that's a conscious decision on your part.
Yes, actually, I think because, well, obviously, first it would be weird if I'm black and I write only white characters, right? That would just be really kind of weird. But I think there's a couple of reasons for that, right? Because there's not enough people there are not enough minorities in fiction, right? And as a kid growing up, there's actually a scene in Unbroken where Lincoln and his first boyfriend, Tony, are going through Time magazine when the whole gay pride thing first started right after Stonewall. And one of the things they comment on is everybody in the magazines is white. Like, hands down, everybody you saw at the beginning of the whole the gay liberation movement was white. That's all you saw. And for me, coming up gay at that age, I was like, is there something wrong with me? Are there no black gay people? And so you kind of grow up and you think, well, I'm kind of an outsider to begin with, and now I'm kind of a double outsider. So when I started writing, one of my goals was always to make sure that the people who were growing up like me kind of see themselves. And in truth, my books have black characters, they have Hispanic characters, but there's also a lot of white characters. Why? Because the world is overwhelmingly white, right? When you kind of look at who I know and what my life is like, it's kind of a mixed group, but it's overwhelmingly white. I think it's just a matter of kind of where we live, the job I have and things like that. You just form friendships with the people you have something in common with. So I think that's unusual. What I have actually heard from a couple of readers is they're surprised that the main character is black or Hispanic or whatever. And they're like, they don't seem any different to me. Like, I could still identify with their experiences. I'm like, yeah, that's the crux of it. Under the skin, we're all pretty much the same, right? We all hurt, we all bleed, we all love.
Speaking of that, when I first read What Binds Us, I had no idea Thomas Edward was black at first. And that was a really good thing because it wasn't... It was a character who happened to be black. It wasn't anything more than that, and you could just, and then once you got to see it, it was okay. But you know what I'm saying? It was like it just was like you read it as a character and you didn't focus on race or any of that, and it was kind of neat. It was well
Yeah,
done.
I thought that was really neat for a couple because I've heard from a lot of readers. And like when readers write and I kind of write back and we talk and they express surprise when I happen to mention, by the way, Thomas Edward was black. Did you realize that? And a lot of people just kind of blew past that. And even when you look at the cover, and I don't know how conscious decision that was on the part of Carina Press, but when you look at Thomas Edward on the cover, you can almost miss the fact that he's black.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I mean, what I mean by it was like, I mean, one of the things I hate when I read a book is like you get the opening scene. It's like, you know, the person's like standing in front of the mirror, like giving like an inventory of themselves. It's like, yeah, I mean, this morning when I got up, I just said, yeah, I'm 6'2", I'm brown hair, losing it. But you know, I mean, I don't do that, and no one does that. And so the danger is that if you don't do that, then you don't know.
Right.
And so Thomas Edward really, I mean, if you actually read the book within a few pages, you learned. But not.
I think some people learned, they noticed it, and then they kind of got caught up in the book, and it just went past them. Because outside there's that racial scene at the country club, where somebody assumes he's a waiter because he's black, and that's almost the only time it actually comes up, and they talk about race, and then they kind of move on from there.
Oh, actually, you talked about it when it was in the hospital scene too.
Oh, right. You're right. Yes.
Thomas Edward says, "Don't believe that just because I'm black, I'm not part of this family."
Wow, I can't believe that you remember that. But some of that was deliberate because being black myself, again, sometimes you run into the situation where you just stop thinking about it, right? I don't walk around in the world thinking like, oh yeah, I'm black. And most people don't necessarily kind of focus on that, but once in a while somebody will say something that makes you come up short. You know, like one of my jobs I was working and somebody met Stanley, who happens to be white. And the next day the guy said to me something about I didn't know he was white, and I was like, well, I'm not going to say to you, I married a white guy. I mean, what's the point of that? He said, what's it like living with somebody of a different race? I'm like, oh, I don't think it's like anything at all.
Right.
Yeah. It just has to do with the way you see race. My ex-boyfriend, who was, by the way, a knucklehead, at some point when he first met Stanley, he wrote me and he called me up and he's like, I cannot believe you married a white guy. And I go, I didn't marry a white guy. I married Stanley, who happens to be white. And he didn't understand what I meant. It's like, if you don't understand what I mean, then you just don't get it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't like. I mean, yeah, I understand completely what you're saying, but it wouldn't be nice if it didn't matter.
Right. And I don't know. I think you're one of the few writers. Well, you're one of a number of writers who do it well. I loved, as you know, Purpose for a bunch of reasons. But one of the reasons I really love Purpose is because you're kind of reading the book, and he's in D.C., and these characters who are kind of not main characters, but they kind of show up, and they happen to be black, and they do what they're going to do, and he acknowledges it, and it's just part of the story, and he kind of moves on. And I thought, this is so cool that he just has black characters show up just because they happen to be black people in a neighborhood, and they're doing what they're doing, but it doesn't really affect the story. It's just that they exist in the world, so they exist in the story. That was one of the things that, among other things, that I really loved about Purpose, was that these characters just kept kind of showing up, and it's like, it's not this all-white world or this all-black world. It's a world where people just kind of exist, and they look different, right? You've got blue-eyed people, you got brown-eyed people, and you got some black people thrown in there.
Well, I mean, it's kind of the world we live in, but, you know, cycling back to the question, I would like to do different characters, main characters, not just have like, you know, bit characters, but you know, the whole idea of like, you know, you write what you know kind of a thing. But my always concern is that like when you're writing, like I can give you an example. I could not write a really good Southern main character because like I don't understand what it's like growing up there. And I've had people tell me like, you know, it's my Southern family. You know, I can write you a great Italian family because you know my family, you know, they're off the boat. So yeah, I know, right? I was making everybody laugh at the wedding I went to on Saturday because I was explaining stories about the family. But I guess the point of this is that sometimes when you read people that are trying to go beyond themselves, they really fail miserably. And I think you and I had this one. I don't know if I showed it to you or you showed it to me, but somebody tried to write a black main character, and it was like, wow, that's really offensive. And I was like, ooh. And I sent it to you. I think I sent it to you. And you were like, just, I'm offended.
Yeah, you did. I remember that, actually.
And so how much of that do you think is why we don't see as many main characters who are a minority? Because they're just, is it because there aren't as many minority writers? Or is it that readers don't want to read them?
So I think it's a couple of things. I think people are afraid to write a race other than their own, right? And I think they get caught up in thinking that a black character is different. I'm like, no, it's a character, right? They're going to do things that are great. They're going to do things that are stupid. They're just a character. And yeah, granted, if you're going to talk about somebody who grew up in the Deep South with racism and stuff, that's harder to do because if you haven't experienced it. But if you're just writing a black character who lives in, I don't know, Philadelphia, it's not that hard, right? Because it's not that different. I mean, I can write white characters. I can write white characters who are amazingly wealthy, and they come across as relatively real, right? Because again, they're just people. It's a character who has these personality traits and these things, and all the other stuff is kind of cosmetic. I don't focus a whole lot on I'm going to write this white character who grew up on the main line or wherever. It's just a character, and this is kind of where he was. I think if you look at oh God, that book that was just a movie about the maids. It was huge.
President's, something about the president, was that the one?
No, it won an Academy Award. It was damn it.
I don't watch a lot of movies since we've had.
Okay. It was whatever. It was a great movie, and one of the complaints was that it was a book about black characters who they were a bunch of maids and stuff in the South in the 50s and 60s.
Okay, I know the movie.
Yes, and I cannot believe I can't read. I love that book. But there was this outcry by black writers who said that if a black writer had written that book, it wouldn't have sold as well because a white woman wrote a book about black characters. It was okay and it sold really well. Well, the bottom line was she did a great job of evoking that period and bringing those people to life. Right? She clearly wasn't black. She grew up in the South where that happened. And as a white woman, she observed it. Right? She talked to her maids and stuff like that, and she did just a great job. So she didn't have to be black, and I don't think the book sold really well because she was a white woman writing black character. I think it sold really well because it was a well-written book and the characters were really good, and she had a huge publishing machine, huge marketing campaign behind her, right? But I think it's possible. I think people need to stop being afraid that they're going to get it wrong. Some people get it wrong because they try too hard, or they think that the person is different.
Let me give you the flip side of that. Mm-hmm. So, as I think you know, I grew up in Philadelphia. And I remember being out one day, and it was me, my friend Keith, and two of his friends. And one of them was white, one of them was black. So 3 white guys and a black guy. And we were walking from, I guess it was, God, I don't know, where was that bar? It's like over down by like the gosh, I don't even remember what it was. It was like a crazy bar that was like, first it was like, I don't even remember. Anyway, we were walking past this bar, heading back to Woody's, and we walked by this car, and the car alarm went off, right? And wouldn't you know, there were 2 Philadelphia cops right there. And of course, you know, I was an assistant district attorney at the time, and they were one of the counties, right? And so they came over to us, and I was like, well, what do you want? I mean, of course, I'm like the asshole because I know what you can and can't do. And he's like, what do you want? And it's like, well, you know, blah, blah, blah. So the 3 of us are standing there, and like, and so three white folks were doing it, and the black guy puts his hands up against the wall like this because, you know, that's what he knew. He was like, I ain't getting beat up here. Yeah. And it was so telling to me that I had like no concept of that. And that's where I get like I don't have the concept of what other people think.
Right, but you had that experience, right? And the dawn you didn't have that concept, but now you've got that concept because you were with him and you saw it happen. So you take that into your character creation. Right. So my whole point is that you're around people. Typically, you're around people who are different. You kind of observe them and you talk to them, and that's how you build your character.
Right. I agree. I mean, and the problem is that, quite frankly, like, I'm not like, if I was writing a story about my life, it'd be pretty boring. And so, you know, you really want to write about characters that have some depth, and and the danger for me is I'm always worried I'm going to like overcompensate. Like you said, you try too hard and you overcompensate, and you get like these stereotypical characters that you really it's not nice. So I mean that's do you ever find that when you read books like that they're missing sort of like an element that we both know that like you're not the be all end all of your experience, I'm not the be all end all of mine, and everybody has there's thousands and millions of us, so we all have different experiences, so no two people are going to be the same. But do you ever read some of these things and go, wow, that's just crazy?
Yeah, it happens. I don't think it happens as much as one would think. I think a lot of times when it happens and it's awkward and it's clumsy, it's because the person isn't a great writer, rather than because they tried too hard. I think trying too hard can be one thing, or going into it thinking like, I got to get this right, or I've got to make sure I get that black experience, or that Hispanic experience, or that Asian experience, or whatever. It's like if you're writing an Asian character, you don't write it in dialect, right? Because that gets annoying and stupid. Right, so you'll throw in a word or two pronounced the way somebody who just came from Puerto Rico would say it, but you don't write an entire set of dialogue that way because it's offensive and it's kind of stupid. So it's that thing you need to kind of get that out there and then kind of pull it back and just let them be a person.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you something, and you're probably going to be like, oh, why do you do that? So cycling back a little bit, so you were finalists for the Land Awards. So why are you still working? Why aren't you making millions?
Because I haven't sold enough books.
So how does it that I mean really your books have sold, I mean your books have gotten like a lot of awards. You've been really fortunate. I'm not saying they're not deserved, but I mean your books have gotten a lot of awards. Why do you think that doesn't translate into like really good sales?
I honestly don't know. I ask myself that question all the time. I was like, what the hell am I doing wrong? It's funny because people who read the book tend to give good reviews and they write stuff. And I got a letter from a woman yesterday, and yesterday happened to be one of those days where I was looking kind of sales figures, thinking like, what the hell? They're like 3 really good books, and they're just kind of sitting there. So I get this letter from a woman who read the book. She's actually a writer too, and she she emailed me and said, hey, I just wanted to tell you that I wrote the book. I don't write long reviews, but I really love the book. I love the characters. I thought you really did a great job of bringing them to life and making me care about them. And she said all of these things. And then she concluded by saying, I wanted to write you because I feel like you're like a well-kept secret and nobody knows about you, and they really should. So I'm like, oh my God, thank you.
Right. Now, how do you translate that into making you a well-known secret?
Short of dialing up Oprah, I don't know what to do.
She's I think she's out of the book recommendation business these days.
So I don't know, and I think a lot of writers struggle with that. I think it's probably the hardest thing for me to deal with. And I think, as I said in one interview or another, I didn't necessarily start writing books to sell a lot of books, but I also didn't intend to write books nobody's going to read, right? Because what the hell is the point of that?
Let me say this. Maybe you jump in if you think I'm wrong on this, but I'm like you. I don't think I started writing expecting that I was going to I was going to become like J.K. Rowling rich. But with each book you put out, the desire to write more and more is greater. And the reality is that, give you an example, I had today off and I was doing stuff, and between getting my daughter to school and then going running a few errands and then starting dinner and then picking her up, and then she came home, we finished cooking dinner together. I got maybe like 2 hours in to write, maybe. And that's my day off. Imagine when I don't have a day off, right? And so I guess what I'm saying is that once you start it and once you have your books out and you see them and there's like this whole flood of ideas that you still want to get out on the paper. So I mean, I think that while nobody sets out, maybe some people do, most of us don't set out to sell millions of dollars worth of books. Being able to leave the day job would be great, not just because you want to make $1 million, but because you'd like the time to write the books.
I think that's absolutely true, but you know what I find interesting, and you said this in a lot, almost every writer I know says that. They have all these ideas bubbling in their head and they can't wait to write the next book and all of this stuff. And there are people who actually, I listen to these writers who talk about they have 2 and 3 stories or books in their head at a time. They're trying to get them all out, and I'm like, I don't know how you do that, because every time I finish a book, I think this is it. I'm never going to write another book. I don't have another story in me. And I remember I was actually at that point when I wrote Unbroken. I was like, okay, so I've gotten 2 books out, and I'm done. There's no other story. And then I answered that question on Twitter. When was the moment you knew you were gay? And the story kept kind of nagging at me and nagging at me. And I actually wrote the book in 9 months. I was shooting for 6, and I did it in 9 because, like you, I have a full-time job. I have dogs. I have a house, and there's all of this stuff. But I was writing at stoplights. I was getting up at 3 in the morning and writing till 5 and sleeping for an hour and then getting up and going to work. I was writing at lunchtime because the story was there and it had to kind of come out. And that's kind of the way I write. I just kind of vomit it up until it all gets out. But now I'm sitting here thinking like, yeah, okay, it's been a little over a year since Unbroken came out, and I've managed to squeak out 2 short stories in that since then, and that's pretty much it.
What about the sequel to What Binds Us?
I thought about that. So that book was such an amazing book for me, not only because it was my first one, it was just this book that they were so alive to me. And when I finished the book, I remember I was just so sad because I woke up every morning and they weren't there with me anymore. I actually kind of sat down and outlined what happened in their life after that, just because I needed to know in my own head that they made it and their life turned out fine. But I don't know that I could do a sequel. I don't know that I could do it justice. I've got some notes for a story that's not necessarily a sequel, but it picks up with their adopted son.
Why isn't that a sequel?
Because they're not really in it. Like Thomas Edward and Matthew aren't really in the book.
But they don't even show up at all?
No. There was some flash fiction that I wrote that introduced the son, and in the book in the flash fiction, it was a Wednesday brief, I think. They appear in a scene walking down the beach carrying a bottle of champagne, holding hands, and that's kind of it. So you know it's 20 years later and they're still together, but I haven't.
I have this feeling that if you actually write that book,
yeah,
it'll be there. I don't think they could stay out.
That's interesting. I don't know. Maybe we'll see. Great. Now you put an idea in my head.
There you go. I'm gonna win that bet. Okay. Speaking of short stories, you have one coming out through Beaten Track, I think.
Yes.
Talk about that.
So this was Deb McGowan, who's actually my editor and the publisher of Beaten Track, and she came up with an idea earlier this year to do a anthology of holiday stories, not necessarily Christmas, but Thanksgiving, and, all of these odd little Flag Day, all of these little strange holidays. And she wanted to be diverse characters, right, races and sexualities and all of this stuff. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. She goes, so I really want you to write a story. And I got all writerly. I was like, well, I don't write on demand. So she's like, what? She's like, give it a shot. I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll see. So I sat down and I started writing this story. And it's actually a story of a kid who's a teenager, and he's gay, of course. And his parents just realize from an early age that he's going to be gay, and they just don't want any part of him. So they kind of ship him off to boarding school. So he's kind of this very lonely kid, and he kind of grows up kind of in the typical way, but without a supportive family. And he knows he's different. He doesn't know kind of what to do about it. And as he grows up and it becomes clear that he's not going to change, right? His mother actually goes to a voodoo practitioner to cast a spell to make him straight. So if you think, I know. So if you think about reparative therapy, right, this is taking it like a step further. That's and it plays out around Christmas. And there's some surprising results of this whole thing that comes about.
So what's the name of the anthology?
The anthology is Boughs of Evergreen. And the story itself is The Christmas Present. It's 23 stories by 24 writers. Again, all holidays. And what makes this project really exciting is that all of the proceeds are going to benefit the Trevor Project.
So this is all from let's pip it a little bit. So it's Beaten Track,
Mm-hmm.
publishing, Boughs of Evergreen, and when's it coming out?
It comes out November 21st. I think it just went up on Amazon this week for pre-sale. But November 21st is the release date, and all the stories will be available individually. So it's a 2-volume anthology, and then each story can be purchased separately for like 99 cents or something. It's kind of great because there's some established writers in there, and then there's a bunch of writers who, for them, it's the first time they've been published. So, and one of the things I love about it is that they do a really great job of editing, so their work is always very professional and almost flawless in that way.
They being
Beatcraft. I'm sorry, that's one of the things I like most about them. And the editorial process can be painful, but it's always a better book when I come out of the process.
I've talked with Deb some, so I can see that she's pretty amazing.
Yeah, she's really incredible. A whole lot of energy, a whole lot of vision.
Right. Okay, well, we've done this for a bit, so anything else you want to discuss? Anything new coming up? Let's do the short story. Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about what?
Well, you said you had 2 short stories.
Oh, 2. I'm sorry. So the other one is a story called... Ooh. Wow. The Wheelbarrow. I'm sorry. It's called The Wheelbarrow.
You don't even remember what you wrote?
Sorry.
Are you kidding me?
No. Actually, I like this one. You might actually like this one. Because
I didn't like anything else you've written.
Well,
so.
But because we were talking about race and those kinds of things, and this story has to do with a black guy who happens to be very dark-skinned, and it addresses that whole thing where within the black community, even in this day and age, there's still some prejudice around darker skin versus lighter skin, kind of kinky hair versus straighter hair, and all of that stuff. And he grows up in this environment, and he kind of devalues himself, and he doesn't see himself as attractive or worth being loved simply because of kind of what he looks like. And there's some other things going on. There's some other people who don't see. So the whole premise of the story is that there's no happiness until the blind shall see. Actually, is essentially the thing. What we see, what we think we see, is not what we really see. So the whole story actually is about pulling back those blinders and letting you see what's really there and not what you are expecting to see in the mirror, and those kinds of things. And again, this one comes about because of there's another voodoo practitioner who's actually the same woman. I know. I was in a phase. The whole it's more spiritual than kind of voodoo, but it's kind of an interesting way of bringing that about. So it's interesting because she was the same woman who's in the Christmas Story, or the Christmas Present, who kind of is supposed to cast the spell on the gay kid, is the same woman who saves all of these people who don't actually see the truth. And that's kind of her thing, right? Through her magic, she helps people see the truth, and it's not always the truth they want to see.
So is that out? Is it coming out? Who put it out? When?
That is actually in another anthology by Lifer. It's Lifer Short Stories. They're actually a very young literary art magazine in Philadelphia. I think they launched last year. They've only had like 3 issues come out. The story's going to be in the 4th issue whenever that comes out. And then they pulled it and put it in their anthology, which is actually out now on Amazon.
Okay. So I understand you're going to buy Giovanni's Room, right?
I thought about it. You know they're open again, right?
Yes, I remember you told me.
Yes, but they're more of a thrift for AIDS type store than an actual bookstore. Which is a little, so we still don't have a real gay bookstore.
We don't either in D.C.
Yeah, I know. And Lambda Rising is where I spent all of my time when I lived in D.C.
Right. I mean, that was like, and just it's weird. It's that it's some of those things that you kind of lament, but then on the other hand, you sit there and say, isn't that what we really wanted? Isn't it what we really wanted was that we didn't need them anymore? And you know, you and I just have had this discussion, and I don't know, we see totally eye to eye as to whether or not we still need them or not. But I mean, the reason they didn't survive, or the reason they're not still here, is because people could get these things elsewhere.
And I think it's good, but I think we still need them. I think the social aspect, right? When you look at a young kid who's kind of coming out, right? Yeah, you can kind of get the book on Amazon, right? Send it right to your Kindle or your phone or whatever. Your parents will never know. But I think the beauty of a Lambda Rising, of a Giovanni's Room, is it gives you a place, right? So when you talk about visibility, like you can walk into Lambda Rising or any other gay bookstore and see people like you, right? You can kind of see the cards, you can see the books and the dirty magazine, all that stuff. So I think it takes away that feeling of aloneness, right? It's a place to meet your tribe. I was always out, so that wasn't an issue for me, but I still went into the bookstore and felt very safe. It was nice to know that I was in a place where I didn't have to hunt for a book about me. Like anywhere I turned, there was a book that was about people like me.
I will say that I think that when I think when I first came out, I was in Minnesota, and they had, they had stores, but they didn't have like a gay bookstore that I could remember. And I think when I moved, Philadelphia was where I had grown up, and then I moved to Minnesota for a while, and that's where I came out, and then I came back to Philadelphia. But I remember going into Giovanni's Room and just finding books like LGBT fiction that didn't even know existed until I went in there. And it's that aspect, I think, that really made them unique and made them necessary. And now it's just like gay sections on LGBT fiction, and it was just like 74 subcategories. I think if you go on to, I'm making that number up by the way, but there's all these subcategories if you go on like Amazon or all these other sites, and it makes it hard to you don't need that store to tell you it exists. I think that was where they were so unique and so different.
Yeah, I think I remember, I think one of the first gay books I bought was actually back in the 70s when I was at Penn, and it was Patricia Nell Warren's The Front Runner.
That was my first.
Penn bookstore. Just walked into the bookstore and there it was. That's where I bought all my gay books, and I remember kind of walking up to the counter with this clearly gay book, and the guy at the counter ringing me up, and he goes, "Oh my God, that's a great book! I'm so glad you're going to read it. You got to come back in and tell me what it's like." And you're like, "Bingo! There's somebody else who's like me, who's kind of supporting you." I think when you're buying books from Amazon, you don't get that. I think for you and me, it's fine because obviously, we are who we are, and there's that whole other world kind of supporting us, or that we're out to. But for people who are still trying to find their tribe, I think it's kind of in service.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but as I said, it's a mixed bag, because on the one hand, the fact that you can go everywhere else is a plus. That it's not hidden away in the back corner where you don't want to. You kind of you go to the store and you kind of sneak through. I mean, you don't have to do that anymore, and so in that sense, it's good. But on the other hand, like you say, it was not just a place to buy a book.
And I think Giovanni's Room for me has always been something special for me, but it was actually most special for me because during the whole Lambda Literary Awards thing, we did a bunch of readings, and I did a reading. A bunch of us did a reading at Lambda at Giovanni's Room the week before they closed. So we were the last group to come through and actually hold a reading there. And then
they reopened, so haven't be the first group to have a new one.
Well, there you go. So I figure I'll sell the movie rights Unbroken. When the money rolls in, you'll move back up here and we'll reopen Giovanni's Room together.
There you go. That's it. Well,
I have a plan. I'm locking and loading.
And if we can't afford to buy books, we'll just write them all. All right. I think that's a good way to. I think that's a good place to end. It's been really good talking to you again, Larry.
You too. I think this is the first time we've actually seen each other face to face.
Yes, I mean I've seen enough pictures, and I think you've seen enough pictures of me. But yeah, this is the first chat. But yeah, it's a good way to end it. And anyway, for those watching, Larry Benjamin, if you haven't read his books, you really need to. Unbroken was amazing, and there's a reason why it was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Awards. But I will say this: I still think What Binds Us is my favorite.
Is it really?
Yes, it's it's one of my top 5 books. I mean, I just really, like, you said like you woke up one day and they weren't there.
Yeah.
I can see that because when I was reading the book, and I've read it like 2 or 3 times now, which is really rare for me. I don't really read books twice. Um, there was just something about it. There are books where you read them and the characters just stick with you. Like you said to me, how did you remember that? I remember like a lot of things about it. I remember the Studebaker. I remember Mom walked with the cane. I remember the maid, the nurse who marries the older brother. I mean, or dates the older brother. I mean, it's just an incredible book. And if people haven't read it on What Binds Us, they really should. So let's see if we can sell a few books for you.
Well,
and,
thank you.
and then you can buy Giovanni's Room before you have to sell the movie rights.
Well, there you go. That'll work too.
All right. Thanks, Larry.
Sure. You have a good night. Thanks again. This was fun.